Hey everyone, so I'm doing a little running around in the GT500 today, so I thought I would talk about my initial impressions of the car and how they have held up. I've had the car for about a month now, and I've put almost 200 miles on the car. Now, when I purchased this car, there was some stuff I really wasn't expecting too much of a change with, and that was mainly with the interior, the ergonomics, the setup. Coming from the 350, since they're based off the same platform, I expected that to be pretty much the same, and that's pretty much held true. The gauge cluster is obviously very different, and it's pretty cool in its own right, having the digital gauge cluster, being able to change between the different drive modes and having more adjustability, so that's really cool. The overall setup inside's the same. All the controls are in the same spots, with the exception being the steering wheel. For whatever reason, Ford reversed a lot of the controls on the steering wheel from the 350, so when I go car to car, there is a little bit of a learning curve between the cars. I kind of wish they kept it the same, but not a big deal, just a little bit of a minor thing I kind of have to get used to. Between the 350 and the 500, there's a lot of things that are similar in terms of the performance aspects of the car. They both have adjustable suspension, electronic steering, the brakes are a very similar setup, so that stuff I was pretty much expecting to be the same. Big difference was the drivetrain, going from naturally aspirated flat plane crank with a manual transmission to cross plane crank forced induction to a DCT. The DCT is probably the most controversial part of this car. A lot of people are very skeptical of it, or they just flat out don't like it. A lot of people have gone from 350s back to from 500s back to 350s because they just didn't like the DCT. Me personally, I like this transmission. You can feel it is just well put together, and it shifts with a purpose. Obviously, having the 350, I have a manual transmission car if I want to drive a manual, but I really don't feel disappointed driving this car. This almost forces you to be a better driver because you keep both hands on the steering wheel, and it puts more of your attention into driving and not into the aspect of shifting. This transmission, even in normal mode, it is really firm. It doesn't kind of feel sloppy like some torque converters do. You feel the shifts without it being too harsh or too clunky. When you go into the more aggressive modes like sport or track, and it'll shift a little bit harder. But even in normal mode, it has a really good, solid, positive feel to it. So I think they did a really great job going with a transmission like this. And if you feel like you need a little bit more, you can put it in manual and you can shift with the paddles themselves. So you have that option available if you decide that you want a little bit more from the transmission. Obviously, it's not the same as a traditional manual, but it's something a little bit more. Now, the engine in this car. This engine has so much power, it is unbelievable. This thing has 234 horsepower and 198 pounds of torque more than the GT350. And this being cross-plane crank, it makes power everywhere. There is no waiting for power. You don't have to work for power in this thing like the 350. The power just comes on everywhere like an absolute hurricane. I was looking at a dyno chart of this car stock the other day. This car makes over 500 pounds of torque at 3,000 RPM. So it's just absolutely incredible the amount of power you have available in this. And this is why I think it was a really good move going to DCT. Now we know that the DCT does make the car faster, but trying to manage this much power with a traditional manual is just, it would have been a lot to manage for a lot of people, and it would have taken away from the performance aspects of the car. I think that was absolutely true. Another really amazing feat that nobody really talks about with this car versus the 350 is everyone talks how the 350 revs over 8,000 RPM, which is really cool. It's really awesome that it does that. But this car is a cross-plane crank with the same displacement, and it has to turn that enormous supercharger, and this thing revs to 7,500. I think that's really good in itself, that Ford was able to get an engine with a cross-plane crank with this much power to rev that high, because this thing makes power everywhere. It doesn't get towards the top and run out of steam. It makes power all the way to red line. Now, I haven't really pushed this car too hard. It's still kind of breaking in. I'm past the 100-mile mark. I've given it some throttle a couple of times, but I'm still trying to be pretty gentle and put a little bit more miles before I really hammer this thing. But this thing is just, it goes. The power is absolutely incredible with this car. A lot of people dismiss this car because it's based on a Mustang platform. And I understand where people come from, because really any car that is based on a high performance variant that comes from a inexpensive and, let's be honest, kind of inferior chassis, the chassis becomes the most limiting part. This is true with whether you're talking about Mustangs, Camaros, Chargers, Challengers, and probably even Corvettes and 911s to some degree. All those cars have very high performance, very track capable versions of their cars, and they're all based on relatively inexpensive, cheap platforms, relatively speaking. So I think a lot of people need to give the Ford engineers a lot more credit what they were able to achieve with this platform. A lot of people say, oh, they should have done more with these cars, but you have to draw the line somewhere. You can't keep going more and more and more and more, because then the car just becomes so unaffordable, nobody can afford it. You can get into one of these cars for well under $100,000 MSRP, and what you're getting for that price is incredible. So I give the Ford engineers a tremendous amount of credit what they're able to do with this platform, because it's still a basic Mustang platform for the most part. They made improvements, but it's based on essentially a $30,000 car, and this thing can turn some incredible track times and just do absolutely incredible things on the street. I do not consider this car a supercar, but this thing will absolutely hang with cars 2 to 3 times its price, no problem. And you're getting that in a Ford off of a Mustang platform. So I give them a lot of credit. Anyone looking to purchase one of these cars, I would highly recommend doing it now. These cars are probably only going to go up in price, because these cars, they're stopping production. Ford officially announced 2022 is the final year of production for this car. So we don't know what the future holds. They just introduced the S650, and they're talking about there's going to be a GT500 version in probably 2026. And honestly, I won't be remotely surprised if it is some sort of hybrid or electric car. Dodge has kind of set the stage with this electric Hellcat that they're going to be doing. So we don't know what the future brings, but if you like these things, I would highly recommend getting it now. I am so glad I bought this car. I don't think the values are going to go anywhere but up on these things, because it's just such an incredible car to drive. Everything feels incredible in this car. The steering is very precise. There's no slop in it. The electronically adjustable suspension kind of lets you pick how you want to drive. Like I said about the transmission and the engine, they're so well paired to each other. The transmission is super fast without being clunky or feeling soft with the shifts. There is just never-ending amounts of power in this car. The brakes are absolutely incredible. They can whoa this thing down so fast. These are some of the biggest brakes ever put on a production car. And probably one of the last points I want to make for my initial impressions of this car are the 350 coming out of that thing. That car is kind of high-strung all around. Most of the 350s, especially the cars that are Cup 2 equipped, they tram line pretty significantly. Not having resonators, the car's pretty much loud all the time. It's a manual transmission, so you're always focused on shifting. So you really have to be very attentive when you're driving that car. This car is kind of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You put this thing in automatic, you leave the exhaust in quiet mode, which it's in now, so you can hear better. Leave the steering in comfort mode. Car is very docile if you can keep your foot out of it. It rides surprisingly smooth for such a track-focused, purpose-built car. It's very comfortable to just drive this car around if you want to have just a, comfortable, smooth drive. You want to go to dinner in this thing. You don't want it to be an aggressive monster. You can do that. But at the flip of a switch, this thing turns into an absolute animal. You put your foot down and this thing wakes up instantly. The back squats down and this thing just roars away. You put in sport mode, you put in track mode. The steering stiffens up. The shifts get firmer. The suspension stiffens up. It's absolutely incredible, the dual personality that this car has. You can have that nice, comfortable ride to work. You want to drive it to work. You want to go to the track and turn some incredible lap times in this thing. You can do that in the same car with the push of a button. So those are really pretty much my initial impressions of the car. I am so glad I purchased this thing, and I can't say enough good things about this car and what this car is able to do for the price point. Don't let the complaints about the DCT in this thing necessarily persuade you. It is an absolutely incredible transmission in this car. And once I start getting some more miles on this car, probably next year I'm going to do a more in-depth owner's experience video, and I'm going to probably do some back-to-back videos driving this thing compared to the GT350R. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.